The Secretary of State, Defense, Pete Hegseth, says the U.S. military is ready with all options to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons.
And his comment comes after President Trump warned time's running out for Iran and called on its leaders to strike a deal on its nuclear program. Iran says that it is open to talks, but they warned it will respond immediately if attacked, saying several U.S. bases were within the range of its missiles. Tehran also had harsh words for Europe after the EU blacklisted its Revolutionary Guards as a terror group and imposed fresh sanctions, calling the moves dangerous and unjustified.
For deeper insight into the tensions over Iran, let's speak now with Barbara Slavin. She's a distinguished fellow at the Middle East and North Africa at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us, Barbara. So based on what we were seeing, the troops movements, rhetoric, and diplomatic signals, how close are we really to a U.S.-Iran military confrontation?
Well, I think it's very worrisome. All of these threats coming as fast and furious as they are suggests that the United States really is prepared to take military action against Iran again. But there are also talks going on in the background. There's some frantic mediation going on by Turkey, Russia, the Saudis, others who are not interested in seeing a new conflict in the Middle East. My concern is that I don't really know whether Iran is able to meet the demands of the Trump administration, at least as they have been expressed. Iran does not have an active nuclear weapons program. It does not have an active nuclear program right now because Israel and the United States bombed it last June. But it still is insisting on its right to have a civilian nuclear program and to enrich uranium. So what can Iran be expected to give up in this situation? And the United States has made other demands on Iran, that it scale back its missile program, that it stop providing support to any allied groups in the Middle East. The demands that have been made would force Iran into a total surrender, a total capitulation. And even though the country is much weaker, the regime is much weaker, particularly after these terrible protests and the repression that we saw, it still has enormous military capacity. So I'm afraid we may be headed to some sort of clash.
Okay, well, Barbara, let's talk about President Trump now. He's got a huge military arsenal moving in that direction and, of course, already stationed in the region, plus all the tough talk. Can he afford to lose face now by not attacking, given his military buildup and all that? And what's the risk of a war with no clear end state and potentially damaging repercussions?
Yeah, I think it depends on what he is willing to accept and declare victory over. If there is a compromise that Iran can accept and that is perceived as being better than what President Obama achieved back in 2015. Remember, there was a nuclear agreement which Trump withdrew from in his first term, an agreement that was actually working. Anyway, if a new deal can be put together that Trump says is better than what Obama got, it's possible he'll declare victory. There's some talk about arranging a phone call with the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. He's not the decision maker in Iran, but that might satisfy Trump's ego. I mean, we're in a situation where the president of the United States is juggling so many different balls, both overseas and at home, Venezuela, Greenland, Minneapolis, that it's hard to know what he's going to focus on next. But I agree with you. He has made so many threats now that it's hard to see him doing nothing in the absence of some sort of deal.
And also in the last half day, the EU placing new sanctions on key individuals and entities in Iran, plus their blacklist of the Revolutionary Guards. Barbara, how's that going to pressure Tehran politically and economically? And what does this European push then mean for President Trump's own desired outcome with Iran's leadership?
Well, I frankly see these moves as more symbolic than decisive. Europe has not traded with Iran since Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and reimposed U.S. sanctions. That frightened all the European companies, and they all very quickly quit the Iranian market. So this is symbolic. I don't know that it will affect Donald Trump's decision one way or the other on whether to take military action.
And Barbara, how do you think other nuclear armed states, like, for example, North Korea, might be watching this U.S.-Iran standoff?
I think North Korea is saying to itself, we were really smart to develop nuclear weapons because nobody dares attack us. And I'm old enough to remember when the United States had a nuclear agreement with North Korea, which the George W. Bush administration left in 2002. Shortly thereafter, the North Koreans left the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, kicked out inspectors, and developed a nuclear arsenal. So, I mean, obviously there is a concern that Iran might follow a similar path, but Iran's program has been heavily monitored, and I think it would be difficult for them to break out and actually create a nuclear weapon at this point.
And earlier in this crisis, Barbara, the U.S. invoked the plight of Iranian protesters as part of the case for pressure on Tehran. The focus, of course, has now shifted towards forcing a nuclear deal. What message does this send about whose interests U.S. policy truly serves, and what's at stake now for these protesters?
I think President Trump was very irresponsible when he said help is on the way as Iranians went into the streets to protest their government. Help was not on the way. And as we now know, at least 6,000 people were killed, maybe more. There are thousands, tens of thousands of people who are in prison as we speak. So he raised hopes. And even if the United States does take military action against Iran now, I don't think it's going to bring down the regime. And again, I think, the changes in that country have to come from within. They cannot be engineered from the outside. The United States is not going to invade Iran like it invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. So I frankly found his comments irresponsible. And as you've noticed, he doesn't mention Iranian human rights or democracy or any of that in his most recent statements. It's all about the nuclear issue, which may suggest that there is still room for some sort of agreement, which he can then claim as a victory. But many Iranians will see as a sellout. Because if it entails removing sanctions, easing sanctions on this regime, they will say that the Trump administration was never interested in their welfare.
Thank you so much for your thoughts. Barbara Slavin, Distinguished Fellow, Middle East and North Africa at the Stimson Center. Appreciate you joining us.